1967. In terms of how I see my role as a theatre maker, and it's a very small role that I can play, but that I feel very committed to, in terms of what I can do through the art that I love, that is the stage and the theatre and the written word and the spoken word, actors and space, time and the presence of an audience. My questions really are today are questions that I ask myself about what could be the role of an artistic project in terms of answering these questions about, are we an open society? How open is our society? Or are we a closed society? How closed is our society? And what role can an artist or an artistic project play in reducing the fear? Because what gives rise to a discourse, a reactionary discourse that says Arabic is the language of the Quran, and if your children do not speak Arabic, then they are moving away from the true path. If your children speak English, as many of our children do today, if your children speak English better than Arabic, as many of the graduates of Kuwaiti graduates and Gulf graduates do today, you are moving further and further away from the true identity. The source of that, to my mind, is fear. And I understand that fear, and it's a real fear. Particularly for the Gulf, particularly for us as Kuwaitis and the Gulf. If you look at most of the Gulf countries today, Saudi Arabia apart, Arabic speakers are a minority. The relationship of the Arabic language to creativity, to research, to invention is a very small relationship compared to what's coming out in the English language. Even in terms of what was translated out of Arabic into other languages or into Arabic from other languages, you can look at the history of translations in Kuwait, actually, as an example, and you can see that actually we are decreasing our appetite and our ability to express knowledge and express ideas in our language. Let alone the fact that we are also a physical minority. We are a physical minority. We as Kuwaitis are a physical minority in our own country. Similarly in the Emirates, similarly in Qatar. So the fear is something that is real. You can understand why there is that fear. And my question is how the representations that we make of ourselves and the questions that art might be led to ask can help create solutions to that fear without leading to reactionism. Because it's reactionism that not only allows people to think in extremist ways, it's also reactionism, I think, that feeds the fear that eats up the society itself, within itself. Sectarianism, Sunnah Shia, Hadar Bedu, all of these questions are fed and propelled by the atmosphere created by a closed society. So I'm for an open society, and I want to say that the questions that we ask through our art should be questions that help to support an open society. In the 5th century BC, there was a dramatist, a Greek dramatist called Aeschylus, who wrote one of his first plays, and it was called The Persians, Al-Furs. And at that time, Athens and the Persians were at war. They were at war they had 3 or 4 wars, and they were at war every 6 or 7 years. And this guy, Aeschylus, came along and wrote a play about the enemy. Not only was it about the enemy, it was actually the enemy had been defeated. So it was the enemy after a battle, and they'd been defeated. So that's really good. So he was a good Athenian because he wrote about them when they were broken. But what he did, because he was a great dramatist, is that he gave voice and feelings and emotions to these enemies. And he allowed the Persians to speak about their pain. He allowed the women to speak about their lost husbands, their lost children, and he allowed their generals to speak about their shame. So he presented what was actually a very kind of revolutionary work, and he was totally taken and put across a barrel in Athens for doing this in the 5th century BC. It was like, how can you represent the enemy and make him have a face, and make him have feelings, and make him have all of these things? Actually, it was great drama, and Aeschylus went on to be one of the most celebrated Athenian dramatists. But he was asking questions that were difficult questions. He was asking questions that actually didn't make him very popular. And similarly, if we look at South African artists during apartheid, living in a society in which there was great injustice, white South African artists like William Kentridge and Nadim Gordimer, novelists and visual artists, who were constantly being accused of being traitors to the status quo being white, empowered South Africans, oppressing black, disempowered South Africans. And if you're a good white artist, what you're supposed to do is say, this is good. What we have, alhamdulillah, مثل ما قال الدكتور, الله يغير علينا. But those guys didn't do that, and Nadim Gordimer went on to become a Nobel laureate, and William Kentridge is a wonderful and highly esteemed artist. If you don't know his work, I recommend strongly that you look at it. He makes animation work as well as paintings. And they were constantly saying to their society, what we have here is something that is not right. What we have here is something that is wrong, and their aim was to morally challenge their societies about what they felt was right and what they felt was wrong, even at the risk of being accused of treason. Now, that accusation of towing the line or not towing the line, of being patriotic, being unpatriotic, is something that I feel a lot of association with in my own journey of making work out of Kuwait and in Kuwait sometimes over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, I came back to Kuwait having completed my studies in London and wanted to engage with making work in Arabic. One of the problems I had was that my own Arabic was not so great at the time, but I wanted to make work in the Arabic language. And it was working through the Arabic language that gradually brought me face to face with a lot of the political questions that later became the themes, the main themes of the work that I've made in the last 10 years. But that first project that I made in Kuwait in Arabic was a very significant project for my own development, artistic development, and thinking about what it is that theatre might be, or what it is that art might be. So I'll tell you briefly about it. It was in 2003, and if you remember at the time, actually all of our streets and everything was taken up by American tanks heading north. And there was the preparation that was being made for the liberation stroke occupation of Iraq. And it was a very weird time, I felt.